The following readings are from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Each week we read from both scriptures as prescribed by Yogananda ji and by his guru, Sri Yukteswar ji, who was guided by Baba ji to compare the two scriptures to show the same underlying truths between them. And sometimes it's more one book than the other. This week's title is entitled By thinking can we arrive at understanding. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. There are many places in the Gospels where we see Jesus in open conflict with the Pharisees, that is to say, with man made as opposed to true mystical tradition. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 15, we see a good example of how they and he locked horns. Then some of the scribes and the Pharisees from Jerusalem came and asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples break our ancient tradition and eat their food without washing their hands properly first?" Jesus, after scolding them for their hypocrisy in observing lesser rules so carefully while ignoring the much more important ones, said, "Listen and understand this thoroughly. It is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him common or unclean. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean." It wasn't that Jesus counseled against such wholesome practices as washing one's hands before eating. In an age, however, when lesser rules were given too much importance relative to the truly important observances, cleansing the heart of impure desires, for example, he emphasized the supreme importance of loving God and of communing with Him. The Pharisees, the orthodox religionists of his day, in other words, had brought true religion down to a level of intellectual hair splitting. They mistakenly considered the way to understanding to lie through a minefield of definitions which they tried to refine to ultimate exactitude. Jesus thought, however, that the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. Without love, indeed, there is no ultimate verity. Without fixity of purpose, born of the heart's devotion, the intellect wanders endlessly. It cannot settle for long on anything. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the second chapter, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant and their interests endlessly ramified. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
This reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda, a book of prayer poems. This is entitled, Make Me Silent, that I may eloquently converse with thee. Wandering through forests of incessant searching, I arrived at the mystery door which conceals thy presence. I knocked loudly on this door of silence with persistent blows of faith. At last the door opened, and I beheld thee, resting on thy altar of glorious visions. I stood with restless gaze, waiting for thee to speak. Thy creation-making voice was inaudible. At last a deep stillness stole upon me, and taught me in whispers the language of angels. With the lisping voice of my newborn freedom I tried to speak. Suddenly the lights in thy temple wrote brilliantly in letters of light. In my little chamber of quietness I am ever at rest. I never speak now, but with the voice of silence. Through my silence, O divine lover, converse thou eloquently with me. This topic, by thinking can we arrive at understanding, is really a vital one on the spiritual path for many people, either because they have an intellectual focus and need to understand the power beyond the just being only relying on one part of ourselves. In other words, we all have minds and we all have hearts. There's more to it than that. But on a very basic level, some people go too much by one or the other, too much by mind or too much by heart. In general, though, our society kind of, at least the way it's portrayed through the media and so on, is more mind focused than heart focused. But still, there's quite a bit of that in each individual. Each individual will have one leaning or the other. And today we're talking about mind. So the mind imbalance. So as I say, it's helpful for everyone, either because they have a mind imbalance, they're too mental, meaning too much mental. Mental is fine. It's just too much mental. They're either too mental or this topic is helpful because someone is surrounded by people who are too mental. And so how do you answer them on their terms? So the the first thing I wanted to mention was how Prasanna was commenting how this commentary contains reading from the Bible and the Gita, and so you have this story from the Bible that goes on, and then you have this line from the Gita. But why? Because the reading could just say, "By thinking can we arrive at understanding." The Gita says, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified, meaning always changing, always growing. The end. Because it says what it means. It's that simple. It's straightforward. And so even in this, the quote from the Bible that Swamiji selected, it doesn't say, Jesus said, don't think so much, feel from your heart. He said that, but you have to get to it when he said, it's not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him unclean, it's what comes out of his mouth. And so then you have to feel behind that how important the heart is, rather than just following things superficially, mentally. Now, one of the reasons for this mental bias, I think, is because we have seen in recent history, not ancient history, that we have accomplished so much through the power of the mind. In particular, in science kind of had a revival from there was a certain impatience with speaking only of theoretical abstractions, statements that nobody could prove. This is mistakenly sometimes blamed on religion, saying religion said all these things that we couldn't prove. And in fact, it was very common in certain religions in certain parts of the world. But in India, it's never been the case that in religion you couldn't prove what you were talking about. No one could, because we have yoga. We have the saints. The saints are elsewhere too, and they were also proving this. But if you're not surrounded by saints, you can get caught up in just, well, this is what everybody says, but I haven't experienced it. And so how do I know if it's true? And so science said, let us just stick with things that we can all observe and we can all agree on and always stay the same, which are mass and distance and time. So in other words, just how far something travels in a certain amount of time or how much mass it is, we tend to say how much weight it has, how heavy it is. We can put it in the scale and we can all agree and say, okay, fine. And even though you think, well, they probably were done after a week then, because what else can you do? The pavakai weighs this much, and if I throw it, it goes about that fast until it hits my friend, and then I run this way. What else is there? But it's amazing what they've been able to build up over these centuries of understanding and explaining the physical universe, including some of its mysteries. I mean, it's amazing. What is its energy it's kilograms meters per second squared or something like that, isn't that what a joule is or something like that? In other words, I mean, how many kilograms per meter squared? I mean, you don't even understand what it could mean. Like, I can run per second, but how can I run per second squared? Second times second, really fast, I guess. I mean, so So it's amazing how go what they've been able to build on top of it, and they're coming to the same understanding that's given in the ancient Indian scriptures, particularly the Vaisheshika philosophy, which talks about the nature of the atom and all these things. But still, they've been able to measure and so on. It takes you to a certain place. But if anyone says I am scientific, I only can believe in what I observe. Well, the great scientists never say that. I mean, for example, uh, this whole concept of quantum mechanics came out and was saying that we can sort of make a model of the universe by saying probably. This is probably what an atom looks like. And if there's an electron going around a proton, this is probably where it is. We can't say for sure. We could say probably. And and so the one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics in the West, whose name was Niels Bohr, some Einstein said God does not play dice. He objected to all of this. He said you should be able to tell exactly where something is. If you say probably, what you can say is, well, I'm having an approximation of the truth. We can agree on that, but don't say it is the truth, because you should be able to say this is where it is. So he said God does not play dice. There's not this randomness. And then this Niels Bohr said, don't tell God what to do. And me, 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 me. And so, people but they were arguing on a level of philosophy. Even Einstein with another physicist, when they were debating some point of relativity, Einstein wrote, well, in the end, I think we have to agree it comes down to a matter of taste, of preference of your own. I mean, how can you say that? It's sort of like, this book weighs a half kg, but I prefer it to weigh 1 kg. No, you put it on the scale and it weighs what it weighs, and that's it. But he was saying in this level that they were debating, it's really a question of taste, meaning we can't really decide. And the fundamental question, which is fantastic, is light itself. How do we understand light? I mean, we understand that we should have it. Earlier this morning, we didn't when the power went out, and we were really trying to understand light. And but we've described light as photons, that it's a sort of stream of photons. But are these photons, are they like particles, like marbles, balls, or is it like a wave, like in the water? Does it exist through motion? And you can't decide, because sometimes light behaves like a wave, but if you're watching the light, then it somehow behaves differently. And how can it do it? Does it go, oh, it's you know, we don't think that life is saying, oh, there's Mahendra, I better behave myself. We expect it to just be some phenomenon that doesn't depend on the observer. But so what it means is our model is incomplete. Light is not confused. Am I a particle? Am I a wave? Light just does what it does, but we have not been able to explain it sufficiently. So it's the limit of our understanding. And the greatest physicists from then and now are still struggling with it. Probably, if you go back deep enough in the ancient scriptures, you'll find some samhita that explains what light is, and maybe in time we'll be able to verify that outwardly again. That's why I say not ancient science, because we say uh, Einstein proved relativity, that things are relative to what? The speed of light. The speed of light is constant. Light always travels at this speed. And so it's Einstein who discovered it, and he gets his face everywhere in his hair. And there's even commercials for having your kid go to tuition, and they show kids with these gray wigs on and say, you will be an Einstein and all that. But, you know, it, it's fantastic. And also, interestingly, his discovery came right at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, which Sri Yukteswar said began properly in 1900. And in 1905, Einstein did this. But if you go back in the old books, Aryabhata says that the speed of light is so many yojanas per whatever. And if you do the calculation, it comes out to the same thing, whatever it is, to 180,000 miles per second or whatever it is. It comes out to basically that same number, very close to it. I don't know how many yojanas that is, but it's some number of yojanas. And so per second. So he said if you say the speed of light is this, he didn't say the speed of light is this when it's going really fast. No, the speed of light is this always. So he's saying the speed of light is constant. This is the number. I mean, what's the speed of your car or your two-wheeler? It depends. What's the speed of ourselves? It depends. If I'm sitting and eating, my speed is zero. You know, so you can't say what the speed is, but he said this is the speed of light. So he was also, all of relativity comes from that same thing too. So we could call it Aryabhata's relativity. Why didn't he do that? Did he have like a bad campaign manager, or he didn't have good PR to get his name attached to it? What's the point of saying any of that? He's saying this is a fact, whether I'm here observing it or not, it's the truth. The ancient writers in India were not so eager to put their names onto things the way people are now. And in fact, it isn't always the scientists who say, I discovered this and I'm going to call it the Dharmarajan law. No, it's that other scientists call it that out of respect and gratitude for them. So that's why. But but Aryabhata and others, they observed all the same truths. So it helps us to be expansive in that, and it also helps us when being faced with an intellectual objection, we should try to meet it intellectually. If someone says, "Well, prove all this," and you say, "But I love God," a person may not be able to receive that and it may not be helpful. And honestly, if you're feeling that devotional, this person, it may not be helpful for them to hear it. If you have enough power, if they're open enough, then it would work, but then we wouldn't have this conversation. I'm talking about when people are too intellectual, which is to say their hearts are too closed. Having a strong mind does not mean you have a closed heart at all. The point is to develop both. And you have both, so why not use both? We have both, so why not develop both? When I was in college, I was reading Autobiography of a Yogi, and I was very inspired. I had met someone from Ananda, and this was very powerful for me, especially Kriya Yoga, but Master's love for God, the experience of God. I had started out very intellectual and thought to arrive at truth just through logic, just through mathematics, and so on. And when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, because I felt something was missing. I knew my model was incomplete. And this was not even just the model, this was the whole book. This was the truth. I mean, how are we going to come up with Hong Sa on our own? Just imagine. Bong Cha, no. Bong Da, no. Gong Kra, this is going to take some time. I mean, where does Hong Sa come from? Master said that in the astral spine, in the astral world, when people breathe in the astral world, the sound it makes in the spine is like Hong Sa. That's why Hong Sa, one of the reasons why it's so powerful. Because you can call anything anything. Is this a book? Is it a postak? Is it a postakam? Is it a kitab? We all kind of have to agree. If I call it a la 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 ja, then you'll say, what is that? But if I say Postagam, okay, yeah, I learned that, we agree. But it doesn't necessarily have an inherent meaning that this book vibrates at the level, although it's true of Tamil and Sanskrit that there's meaning in the syllables and they have a vibration beyond, whereas modern languages don't have that in the same way. So there is actually some truth, but it's pretty deep and shrouded. So Hong Sa, those particular sounds are real. And that's why we say them to help us attune to that reality that's there. And so the I also it's interesting if you have a chance if you inhale and close your ears, don't do it now, but if you do, it sounds a little bit like Hong. Why don't you do it? Because people sort of if you just inhale through your nose and close your ears and just listen to the sound inside you. See how it sounds a little bit like Hong, or at least Ha, or there's some kind of a hong. I mean, it doesn't sound like lulu laja. It sounds like hong. And then exhale and notice it doesn't sound necessarily like saw. You some people it does, but it sounds different than your inhalation. So inhale, then exhale. See, I'm biased. I hear saw, but at least what I hear is different from hong. So even on this superficial level, we can say, okay, yeah, maybe there is. I can mentally take a step in that direction. I don't just step. Some yogis are in their astral world going hong sa, hong sa. Okay, if you say so, I just have to believe it. You practice hong sa and then you believe it because it works. So, whatever we want to call it, this is working for me, and that's what's most important. This is leaping ahead of even the head and the heart to, again, reality, to the practical. Call it whatever you want, say whoever you want, said whatever. Does it work? This is what the yogi asks. And one of the rules of yoga is do what works, which also means do what works for you. This is the law of the spiritual path. We're having a discipleship ceremony in a little bit, an initiation. And part of that, part of the discussion around discipleship is finding the best path, the best spiritual path, Enika, for me. Not what is the best path. There is no best path. It's what is the best path for you? What's going to work for you? And that's true, of course, for everyone else too, not just here, but everyone. So we can't say follow our path, it's the best path. Does it match you? Does it feel good to you? Do you sync with it? As one of our friends here, Gayatri, said, I feel so in sync. She said, in synchronicity or in sync, I guess sync, matching. And so, and if it's somewhere else, then find that and follow that. And someone else from another path or another guru, if that's working for them, that's their path. That's the point. So we're not trying, there's no comparison in that way that's meaningful. But compared relative to myself, very meaningful. This works better for me, or this works best for me, or this, in my case, it just worked. I tried to read other books besides Autobiography of a Yogi, and I just couldn't get into them. I kept falling asleep, and I wanted to be very intellectual and discriminating, and I just couldn't. I just was yawning. That's what I was doing. And whereas Autobiography of a Yogi was changing me. But as I was in college, I went to a few of these college gatherings, and there was one gathering with a woman from a Jewish temple who was a Jewish scholar, and she was there to talk a little bit and then also answer questions. And I had the natural desire of one studying some teachings, especially new to the teachings of yoga, to sort of be able to bring them up in some way. But if I said Patanjali's second aphorism is, hmm, you're the expert. Hmm? Solinga, that it's not fair. I mean, it's not only, I mean, she could say the same thing about something in Hebrew, but it's also I'm trying to control and take over the conversation. And you see, people will do this. They have their own desire, their own agenda, and then they just dump it on whatever not only the person has come to talk about, but all the other people have come to hear. So it's not really fair. I knew if I said that, and if I said the second aphorism says this, how does that relate to your truth? Still, it's not really fair because that's at least fairer. But still, I'm trying to bring something out from left field. And all of what did I love about yoga at that time that I could see was that yoga tries to help you be a better person, not just smarter, happier, which is, I mean, more effective, but happier and ultimately divine. And yoga helps you to find union with God. All the spiritual paths do, but yoga for me was so clear, direct, everything. Plus, it had techniques. So it answers not only the yin, but the epity. Because everybody can tell you yin. Why? Because we're all made from a crocodile spinning, on the top of a mountain, and it's a happy crocodile, and try to merge with the happy crocodile, preferably not through the mouth. I mean, You can say whatever you want, but is it true? And even so, then what do we do, to sort of figure out if it's true? As Master said, yoga helps you find it out, helps you to find out the truth. Don't laugh too hard, or I'll start laughing. Um, so I wanted to say to her, meaning because I wanted to ask a thoughtful question, but I wanted to be fair. So I wanted to say, how does Judaism teach us to merge with God? But unfortunately, as far as I knew from the religion, it doesn't actually teach that. It's more that we are to follow God's laws perfectly and so on, but not that we become one with God. Even Christianity does teach that, but it's hidden. And that's part of what Jesus was criticized for, but it's not common language within the religion. And so to just say that, which was really what I wanted to ask, didn't seem fair also, because I was imposing. It's in there if you look really hard, but I couldn't help her find it. So I said, what does Judaism teach? How does Judaism describe the ideal person, the ideal human being? We would say yoga would say I didn't say this, but the ideal human being would be one with God. So rather than put it that way, so I just said, how does they describe, what do you think of as the ideal human being? And she said, wow, that's a very good question. I have to think about very sincerely. And she was intrigued and she said a few things, but she didn't really give an answer. And then later I knew someone who studied with her and he said she came back and said there was this kid who said this thing about the ideal human being and she had to think about that. Let me tell you something. If you made her stop and think, that's saying something because she's this, eminent scholar and so on. But it wasn't me, and I was cheating because I was pulling from another, whole science of the truth. But I thought we could have a sincere discussion, and we did. But then there was a professor who was a professor of mine there, and he was saying something about, or maybe this was in a different conversation, but anyway, the question was basically, can computers become just like people in time? And I said, I thought that once, that through logic, computers could become just the same as people, but somehow that thought was not satisfying to my heart. And so I abandoned it. And and it was unfair because I was kind of baiting him and he totally went for it. He just said, it wasn't satisfying. You abandoned it because it wasn't satisfying. As if to say, what does that have to do anything with truth? And I didn't have the heart to argue with him, plus it wasn't respectful. But still, it just, where do we have it here? Yeah, this is what Prasanna read, Swamiji says this: without love, indeed, there is no ultimate truth. See, love and truth are both fundamental to this universe. Why? As Master said, find it out. How do you know? Because when you meditate, you become more loving. And as one person came to me, a relative of yours, who was really sweet, um, the son who was an adult was on this path and meditating, and the more he meditated, and we were sort of encouraging to serve and energize a little, but he was going deep in meditation for so many hours. I had my doubts about it, but anyway, because he was behaving very harshly and he was speaking harshly. It was like meditation gave him even more ideas of what to say to hurt everybody's feelings. And his father came to me and he said, but I would think that meditation would make you more lovable. And I paused because I thought he was going to say loving, which is true, but he said lovable. And I thought, oh, how sweet. Since then, I've heard the phrase more frequently than that. It's really true. Meditation does make you more lovable in the sense that that peace, that love, that calmness radiates from you, and people feel attracted to it. You may find as you have been meditating, that strangers may come up to you and ask questions, ask for directions or something more than they used to. I mean, because you could say my family treats me differently or something. That's a real test, actually. I mean, it's a real proof of it that they say, mommy, you're nicer now is the one we hear that because we're calm. We lose our temper less frequently. But but with strangers who don't know you, that's a kind of, they don't know anything. But I think they check and they say, okay, that face looks less scary than these other faces. So I'll ask, CIT Nagarenge, sort of try that. But one man told me the people who come to my job all day, I sit at a desk. The people who come to me, they are always like this, and I am also like this. He said, but now that I meditate, they are nicer, and I am nicer also. Which reminds me of one story I can't help but tell. In California, in America, has this sort of reputation of being this cheerful, happy, relaxed place. And on the East Coast, which is where I was born and grew up, things are a little more serious. And and so a friend of ours who was actually from the East Coast but lived at Ananda Village, he was Swamiji's secretary for many years. He was on the East Coast and he was buying a ticket. And he came up and he said, could I have a ticket for so-and-so a train? And the man said, you're from California, aren't you? And it wasn't that he had some accent or anything like that. And he said, he said, I am. How could you know that? He said, you smiled. So so the intellect only takes us so far. And people instinctively know when they've gone too far with the intellect, meaning we're supposed to arrive at truth. Even intellectually, people will agree, yes, 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 it's all about truth. And that's why when Swamiji said to Master, how do you deal with intellectual people who are challenging you? Meaning because they're trying to have everything spelled out with no heart. And heart is a big part of it. Like my professor, when he said it wasn't satisfying, I couldn't say, but don't you know that guides you to it is when you say it's not satisfying, that is satisfying to you. That's why you're saying it. I do not use the heart at all. That's what I prefer. But prefer. That's what you like. It's a like and a dislike. It's that those come from the heart only. So it's total. Anyway, so what Master said to him was true intellectuals you never have a problem with. Because anyone who's interested in knowing the truth will, if they see that they've been wrong, say, oh, I was wrong, you're right. Or they will agree, they will be fair in the discussion. Let's talk about these different facts and so on. And so, but it's when you have people with a bias, they're not really being intellectual. They have a prejudice, which means a prejudgment. I want it to be this, and so I will make the facts prove that it is this. One man told me, you know why people smile at each other? It comes from the wolf. See, wolves, people evolve out of wolves, of course. Do they? As Swamiji said to someone, speak for yourself. But but he said, and the wolf, what does it do? It growls. It shows its teeth to be threatening. And of course, people were the same way. And so, of course, human beings, they would see someone coming from afar and be like, you know, stay away from my house. These are my chapatis, and so on. But then they saw that it was a friend coming. And so they'd have to change in mid growl. And so they would go, and that's how the smile was invented. That's why, all this sentimental spiritual stuff is just garbage. It all comes from the wolf. So I I I didn't have the heart to argue with him because I had another argument I was building up. And anyway, but I wanted to ask him, and were you there? Do you have a photo? Is there a journal where the person said, I invented a new thing with the face today? I was growling like the wolf that I am. You just make up something and then say that it's true because none of us can prove it. But I am being intellectual. So, at the heart, remember, truth applies on every level. And so when you are debating a truth, there should be a way that you can possibly answer it or at least challenge it on its own terms. Because if you say, like Master did, love God to every intellectual question, for Master, it could have worked if the person was listening. But it's not fair to do that to everyone because they just say, well, then you're nuts and you're cheating by just saying it's all God. You're not meeting my answers, my questions on their level. Now, we may not have the answers, so we can always say, well, I'll get back to you. Good point. Let me think about it. Then we can read about it. We can ask someone, all these things. If the person is just trying to argue, Sri Yukteswar, who was the smartest person ever, he would say, well, maybe you're right. Maybe it's right. It could be. And you've heard Master say that too. Maybe you are right. But he said, Master always said that. Rather than argue, just say, maybe you're right. You're not agreeing that you are right, but you're not disagreeing either. Maybe you're right. I don't know how you ever could be right. It's totally wrong. But maybe you're right. Maybe there is a planet where all the wolves are walking around. Maybe you're right. But, so this is how you get out of a useless argument. But the thing is that we we should be seeking to know the truth. That's the only purpose of the intellect, the heart, the soul, everything. And that's what makes you a devotee. You're a devotee if not you want God, but you want truth. You just come in time to discover that the truth is that there is a God. How do we know? We mostly just know inside. And the intuition, our intuitive faculty, is much more powerful than intellect. And the great scientists always say that. Did Einstein, when he figured out that the speed of light was constant, did he just start going E equals mc squared? No. Did he try, let's try A equals bc squared? No, that doesn't work. Again, no, he didn't arrive at it let's see, if I were flying on a, photon and all this, what he had was a vision. He was puzzling over how the speed of light there were things that weren't adding up in his theory, and he suddenly had a vision, he said, that if he would be traveling at the speed of light, that all the light around him would be at that same speed. And if it were a wave, if you're moving at the same speed that a wave is, it looks like a standing wave. In other words, you don't see it moving, it's just standing. It appears to be still because your motion matches the motion of it, and so it looks like it's unmoving. And he realized the speed of light had to be constant, and then he had to work it out mathematically, which took years. But his arrival at the truth was through intuition. And so again, Einstein would be one of the high priests of the intellectual church, and he says intuition. So you can know that you're on stable footing. It's not us versus them, it's just the truth. But sometimes, for example, I was being picked apart by some intellectual relatives of mine who were trying to prove that the spiritual path and Ananda were false and wrong and all these things. And so they were giving me arguments and I was fighting back their arguments. And with one of them, I was used to fighting with him because I had to fight with him all the time. So I had gotten good at it and I'd gotten over feeling sad about it outwardly. But of course, inwardly, I still felt sad. But I was good at deflecting his arguments by challenging him. And he had enough honesty to say that, well, and okay, yes, that is true. He wouldn't just, he wouldn't ever concede a point. But at the end of it, he said, you may be smarter than me, but I'm still right. Which is to say that he convinced against his will, he was of the same opinion still. That's what Master would say. That was a phrase back in his time. So, meaning you're convinced, but you don't like it, so therefore you're unconvinced. It's ridiculous. If you're a true intellectual, you wouldn't be that way. But then I had to argue with my cousin also, and my cousin is brilliant, smartest person I know probably on one level. And I was taking a break and I was thinking, okay, if he says this, then I'm going to answer with that. And then, but if he brings in that point, I'm going to bring in this point. But you know what? That's kind of mean. So maybe, no, I don't think I want to say that because I was thinking, yeah. And what about you? And then I thought, I'm not going to feel good even if I win that way. So no. And then I had this thought, you are going to lose. And I thought, oh no. because you can think whatever, but if someone can it's always possible to be out logicked where you get to the point and you have to say, I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know. So I decided that I was going to build a wall between my head and my heart, and that no matter how confused my mind got, I was not going to let go of what I knew to be true. In a way, I was saying, I'm not going to be convinced against my will. But I wasn't basing it on that I want this to be true. It was more autobiography of a yogi has said that this is true. My experience of Swami Kriyananda and Master and Ananda have made me know that this is true but I don't quite know why. I was confused at that point. I'll come back to it. So I'm just not going to I'm not going to let it poison my heart. And I still went in, though, bravely and completely lost. Every little doubt thing, I have done this, what pulled out things I hadn't even heard of, trying, and I couldn't answer them. And so I went away very confused and full of mental doubts, but I still said, I'm not giving up God in my heart. And then later, after, because also with some people they're very magnetic, and if they're not magnetic they can be loud, and if they're not only loud they can move their hands. In mathematics we talked about it as proof by hand waving. E equals mc squared. If you gesture it must be true. And other people called it proof by intimidation, where you would sort of and be, okay, yeah, I'm sure it's true. So that's kind of what he did. And I was confused by hand waving and intimidation. But I realized when I was out of his magnetism, I should also say I was hurt, because he was trying, this was my cousin and I grew up with him. He was trying everything he could do to tear my beliefs down, to make me doubt myself, just so that he could say he was right. And it was like, but don't you remember when we had ice cream? Don't you remember when we used to, and you've helped me all these years, but as soon as you don't like what I think, slash, and that's what it felt like. And so I was hurt too. And that's hard to think clearly then. So after that, after some time, I realized, wait a minute, I have had experience of these things. It's not that I believe them only, and that's what he was attacking. Why do you believe this? How do you know? Because I've experienced it. That's the simple answer. And even if I haven't experienced everything that he was criticizing, it's one step beyond my experience. Maybe I haven't experienced it yet. So that's a leap of faith. Based on my experience, I'm willing to take this step into the unknown based on my faith, which is not belief. It's born of my experience, my memory. But so that was the answer to all of his challenges, but I couldn't come up with it at the time. So no, though also you can give autobiography of a yogi to people if some people may get a lot out of it, and it has big and fancy words, so they will like that if they're intellectual, and the new path also. And so, but more than that, remember for ourselves that the intellect will only get us so far. And we might be okay if we were just left alone in our little meditation room. And, at regular hours, the idlis and dosa came on the conveyor belt and were dropped onto the plate. And then we went back to meditation. But we are challenged all the time by being in a very mental world and being surrounded by mental people. And it can have an effect that either you spend a lot of time fighting it back, not fighting the people, but saying, I know there is more than just the mind. And more than the heart, too. There is the soul. And what is the soul? What does the soul say? I am a child of God. I am a part of God. I know that. Do I know it fully? No, because then I would be one with God. But I know it and I want to know more. Master said a saint is not only one who has achieved oneness with God, but one who was working towards that end. He said it's very legitimate and for the use of the word saint, to say that we're all saints in the making, because that's where we're headed. He said, define yourself by your aspiration, your goal, where you want to be. Say, that's who I am, not just where I am at present. In other words, look at the trajectory, not at the position. And so we have to feel that. And so we either resist the thought that, yes, but what is your retirement plan? And, do you know about this new thing or that thing and whatever? I do. And I'd love to tell you. And so it's not wrong. You can appreciate their enthusiasm, but always have that quiet eloquence with God and hold on to what you know. You may know Derek Bell, meaning you may know the album The Mystic Harp, which is one of Swamiji's albums. You might have heard the music. I talked to Derek Bell. He visited Ananda, and for a period, I was walking around with him. And he was from Ireland, and he was practicing yoga. And he had so many people coming up to him saying, "This is ridiculous. What you're doing is terrible." It's just so funny. Why did they say that? Just because it was different. That's all. I mean, we have had people in America see the fire ceremony. They walk in off the street. Hey, what do you guys do? They see the fire ceremony and wonder, oh my gosh, is that what they do with their old members or something like that? And they run out. And in India, it's just the opposite. When we were in an apartment complex in Alwarpet, that's where our center started, we thought maybe we could just sort of fly under the radar and nobody would notice that we were kind of also operating as a public place, but not very public. And, because they could easily say, that's it. You can't operate here anymore. We did certain things to be smart about it, but we thought maybe we could just hide. The secretary of the organization lived across the walkway from us, and it was the only house across the walk. There were only two, the bad guys, us, and the secretary to watch. And above us lived the president, the owner. So, if you just, oh, what's going on down there. So there was no way we could hide. So we had to be very open. It actually would have been our nature to be open anyway, but still. So the president called us up finally. I would like to meet you. And how are you and where are you from and why this name Iyer and all these things. And then finally he said, so what do you do? Well, we have satsangs. And what do you do in your satsangs? And I say, well, we begin with Gayatri mantra. I am very pleased that you do Gayatri mantra. And so I sensing an opening, I said, and then after that, we chant these. I am very pleased that you do Gayatri mantra. And that was it. That was the extent of the interview. We did Gayatri mantra. You're in. It's fine. So like I said, for some person, it's strange and unfamiliar and weird. For the other person, it's exactly what makes it okay. And so Derek Bell, running around Ireland as a young man, was criticized constantly by people. And he was the only one he knew studying Kriya Yoga through master's lessons. And he said, and I had to come to realize that they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. It's just that simple. Most people who will argue with you about what you're doing, unless you say, are you in level 4? if they haven't studied it, how do they know? Remember, most people are arguing because they feel challenged. They feel threatened. Because why? Because I threatened them? No, no, no. I hope not. One woman said that to us. In my house, there is so much shouting. I do most of the shouting. I said, well, one other person said, every time I see my mother, I know just by the look on her face that she's going to shout at me. So I shout first. Just sort of like, back to Hong. So let's start over again. So, but anyway, unless people know, have they read Autobiography of a Yogi? Have they made a thoughtful study of this so that they're then able to question it? No. But if they haven't, it's because you somehow, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, are bothering them. Because often when we are trying to be better in ourselves, it bothers other people because they are reminded that they perhaps would like to be better in themselves too, and they don't want to have to do the work. And we're not saying do the work, but just by the fact that we are doing that, it's a challenge. Master said that, of speaking of the life of Jesus, speaking of his own life. He said, the great masters come and act as mirrors. They act as a mirror to humanity. And so people seeing the mirror see themselves as they actually are. Because when you see a divine person, then you realize, oh my God, I am not that. I thought I was pretty good and I'm not. So you have two choices. He said, you can either become better or you can break the mirror. And he said, generally, that's what mankind does. They break the mirror. I don't want this reminder. I don't want this prod. Stop it. Leave me alone. So sometimes if somebody's vicious with you, it's because that they're trying to protect their own turf. In the middle of an argument with a close relative of mine, all these different, this is why it's false. This is why holy people are not real. This is why, you can't know until you die and then it's too late. So why not make a lot of money and enjoy until then? All these things. And I was trying to, yes, but what if it is true? You'll be glad. And on the other hand, and why, on and on. And he said, don't try to change me. I was saying, what? I mean, I wasn't trying to change him. I mean, I would have loved to, but I wasn't. I was just trying to survive. And I wasn't saying, actually, have you looked? I didn't say anything personal. I had no consciousness of trying to change. I was just trying to live another day. And if I was changing anyone, I was changing myself. But then that's when I realized that's what was on his mind. And because of what I was doing, it was threatening his model. Everything he held dear, I was saying, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in this. And it made him doubt his values. So keep that in mind too, and be compassionate towards people too, and patient with them. And above all, pray for them. Pray that Master bless them. Pray that Master bless you, because we get to God not through the intellect and not through the heart and not through the soul even, meaning on our own. We get to God through the Guru's help. And someone was saying, why is it so? And it is so because it is so. That even Krishna said to Namdev in that story, that's my law. That's just how it is. But that doesn't mean we should tell people that. That's an understanding you have to arrive at on your own. And how do we know? Because in this case, we do actually. That didn't work. That didn't work. That didn't work. You find out nothing works except the Guru, except God and the Guru's teachings. And that works much better. A friend of ours, I'll end with this. A friend of ours said she was involved in a spiritual organization before Ananda, and she found out after many years that something very bad, is the word she used, was going on in the organization. She said it had to do with the leader. It didn't have anything to do with me. I was never harmed by it, but it was happening, and I felt so betrayed that I decided from now on, no more teachers. I came out of the organization. I will study, I will learn, but I just won't join any group. No more groups. And she said, and for 5 years, I watched the TV, the spiritual channels, I read books and so on, and I was on my own. And she said, but I wasn't growing. I mean, isn't that amazing? She'd had enough of an experience, even though it had multiple dimensions and some of them unpleasant, that she still knew what it felt like for that we need God to reach us also through others. And she came to this path and she said, that's why I'm wanting to come here. And you could tell she was kind of like many people checking us out. We'll see in the beginning. You're laughing, but Napoleon sat me down after level 2 on page 70. Swami Kriyananda says this about Patanjali. What does it mean? And I mean, it's the first and last time I've had that happen. So I was there from 9 to 10 p.m. just going down. And in Article 61, Section B, first paragraph, explain to me the experience of God. And I loved it because I said everyone should be so sincere, trying to answer the doubts that they have and so on. Maybe a little earlier in the day, but still, I'm sorry, it's not fair. I don't. So, and then after a while, he said, I think I'm going to arrive at my deepest understanding not through just reading a book. Exactly. So read the books, they help, but it has to come inside also and primarily. God bless you.